They ordered a police dog to attack an elderly black man, not knowing the dog was about to expose everything they tried to hide. What happened next shocked the entire city, went viral overnight, and forced a department to confront the truth. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about loyalty, legacy, and a war hero who refused to be silenced. You won't believe what the dog did in the final moments. This story will leave you speechless. Stick around till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories that need to be heard. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, casting long amber shadows over the cracked sidewalks of East Hollow. Harold Jennings, 72, shuffled along the edge of Pine Street, clutching a brown paper bag of groceries in one hand and his veteran's cap in the other. His silver beard caught the last rays of sunlight, and his weary eyes scanned the quiet neighborhood he'd walked for decades. Nothing felt unusual, until it did. A sharp screech shattered the silence. Red and blue lights exploded behind him, and tires screamed against the asphalt. Harold turned, startled, as a police cruiser slammed to a stop just feet away. Doors flung open. 2 white officers leapt out, guns drawn and shouts ringing in his ears. "Hands where I can see 'em. Get on the ground," one bellowed. Harold froze. Wait, I think you've got the wrong," he began, but they cut him off. "Now." Slowly, painfully, he raised both arms, his bag tumbling and groceries scattering over the sidewalk. He winced as a can rolled into the street. "I'm just walking home," he said, voice shaking but steady. "I live 2 blocks up. I volunteer at the VFW. Maybe you saw me there." The taller officer narrowed his eyes. "Matches the description," he muttered to his partner. "What description?" Harold asked, confused. "I just left a food drive." But the officers weren't listening. One of them grabbed the radio on his shoulder and barked, "Requesting K-9 unit to Pine and Orchard. Suspect non-compliant." Non-compliant? Harold didn't run. He didn't resist. He stood still, in his old coat and well-worn boots, heart racing, but not from guilt. From fear. A different kind of fear than the one he'd known on foreign soil. This one was closer, colder, familiar in the worst way. Minutes later, another cruiser rolled up. From the back leapt a German shepherd, muscular, alert, panting with anticipation. The officer holding its leash gave a single command. "Take him down." Harold's breath caught. His eyes locked with the dog's. And in that flash of a moment, something shifted. The dog bolted toward him, jaws bared. But what happened next stunned everyone, including the officers who sent him. The German shepherd surged forward like a missile, muscles coiled, eyes locked. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. Harold didn't move. He didn't run. His body was rooted to the cracked pavement, but his mind raced, back to Kandahar, to drills, to instinct. The dog's paws pounded the ground. 10 feet. 6. 3. Then, nothing. The beast stopped cold. Its front paws slid slightly on the pavement as it came to an abrupt halt just inches from Harold. For a split second, silence smothered everything. No commands, no crowd noise, no sirens. Just the sound of the dog sniffing the air, tilting its head. And then the unthinkable happened. The dog sat. Just like that. It didn't bark. It didn't growl. It didn't attack. It sat. The officers exchanged frantic glances. "What's wrong with the dog?" one hissed. "Delta." The handler barked, using the dog's name. "Engage." But Delta didn't move. Instead, it let out a low whine, almost like recognition. Then, gently, it inched forward and nudged Harold's trembling hand with its nose. Soft. Familiar. Affectionate. The onlookers were frozen, stunned into silence. Harold blinked in disbelief, then whispered, "Valor." The dog's ears perked up instantly. "Not Delta. Valor." The handler stammered. "Wait, how do you know that word?" Harold slowly knelt, his knees popping, and looked the dog in the eyes. Because that's not your dog, he said, voice low but firm. That's my dog. He reached into his coat and retrieved a faded dog tag, one not meant for humans, but for military K-9s. It read, Valor, U.S. Army K-9 Unit, retired. The crowd erupted. Phones lifted. Cameras zoomed in. Did that dog just stop an arrest? Someone whispered. An elderly woman near the curb clutched her chest. That's Harold Jennings. He trained K-9s in the war. The younger officer's jaw dropped. The older one sneered. I don't care who he is, he growled. We had a match. He fits the profile. No, said the young cop softly. This doesn't feel right. Meanwhile, Valor curled beside Harold's feet like a loyal companion returning home. His tail wagged slowly, not out of excitement, but out of recognition. The attack had never happened. Because the dog remembered something the police didn't. Who trained him? Who loved him? And who he would never betray. The dog's calm loyalty wasn't a fluke. It was history. Decades of training, trust, and battlefield bonding reborn on a street corner no one would have expected. Harold gently stroked Valor's fur, his fingers trembling not from fear, but memory. Easy now, he murmured. Just like old times, huh? The officers were still frozen in disbelief. The handler kept yanking the leash, shouting commands the dog no longer obeyed. Valor wouldn't budge. His posture was protective now, calm but alert, blocking Harold from harm like he'd done 100 times before overseas. Sir, the younger officer finally said, stepping forward, voice quieter. How do you know the dog? Harold didn't look up. I don't know the dog, he said, still petting Valor gently. I raised him. A hush fell over the street. I was Master Sergeant Harold Jennings. U.S. Army K-9 Division. 18 years, active duty. I trained dogs like Valor to detect explosives, disarm attackers, and, most importantly, not act out of fear. He finally stood, slowly. He was one of my best. The handler looked flustered. That's not possible. I've had him for 2 years. He's always been compliant. Harold's voice sharpened. That's because you gave him commands. I gave him purpose. He reached into his coat and pulled out an old, leather-bound folder. Inside, commendations, military papers, and a photograph, him, younger, in uniform, kneeling beside Valor as a puppy, both beaming under a dusty sun in Afghanistan. The young officer examined the photo. His voice caught in his throat. Sir, this is you. The crowd murmured louder now. One bystander, live streaming, said into her phone, Y'all, this man's not just innocent, he's a war hero. That dog knows him like family. Harold looked at the officers with a steadiness that only came from years in uniform. I've bled beside dogs like this. Watched them die saving lives. And now you're using them to hurt people who look like me. That hit hard. The silence wasn't from confusion anymore, it was from shame. Valor gave a soft bark, tail thumping once. The same dog they sent to take him down had just stood him up. Not because of a leash. Not because of a badge. But because of something stronger. Loyalty. The tension on Pine Street had shifted, from fear to awe. People emerged from corner stores, stoops, and nearby bus stops, drawn by the flashing lights and the stillness of an unfolding miracle. Phones rose into the air, recording not chaos, but something few had ever seen, a retired war dog, calmly guarding a black man that officers had just tried to detain. Is that dog protecting him? Someone whispered. Valor didn't move from Harold's side. His body rested against the old veteran's leg, but his eyes remained locked on the police, tracking every twitch, every radio buzz. Not hostile, just alert. Professional. Like a soldier still on duty. Harold exhaled slowly, not from relief, but resolve. The police, however, weren't handling the shift well. The older officer grew more agitated by the minute. His voice grew sharp, defensive. Back it up, folks. Nothing to see here. But there was everything to see. "What's his name?" a teen shouted from the sidewalk. Harold looked down. "His name's Valor." Someone else chimed in, "That's the dog from the military documentary. I saw it in school." Now the murmurs turned into voices, questioning, skeptical, angry. Why are they trying to arrest a veteran? He trained the dog and they still sent it after him? Where's the respect? The younger officer looked rattled. His hand fell from his holster, ashamed. "Sarge," he said quietly to his partner, "we're losing control." The older cop turned red. "He fits the description, and that's all I need." Harold straightened his shoulders. "Description? You mean black, old, and walking home from a food pantry?" His voice rang out like thunder, clear, dignified, and impossible to ignore. "Is that what gets you bitten these days?" The crowd reacted instantly. A woman shouted, "Say it louder, sir." Valor, sensing the shift, let out a low growl, not at the officers, but at the tone. Protective again. His loyalty wasn't just to Harold, but to justice. News vans pulled up. Microphones appeared. The story had escaped the block and was now climbing the airwaves. And in the middle of it all stood Harold Jennings, not with fists, not with fury, but with truth. The kind you can't leash. The kind that stands on four legs. The kind that refuses to be silenced. The atmosphere had become electric, charged with something deeper than outrage. It was recognition. Recognition of truth. Of injustice narrowly avoided. Of a system exposed. The younger officer, Officer Daniels, stood frozen, his gaze bouncing between Harold, the dog, and the cell phones catching every second of this unraveling incident. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his radio, then paused. "Sir," he muttered, voice barely audible. "I didn't know who you were. I didn't know." Harold didn't flinch. "You weren't supposed to," he said, calm but cutting. "That's the problem." A hush settled again. Then the older cop, Sergeant Buckley, took a step forward, trying to reclaim control. His jaw was clenched, hand hovering too close to his taser. Still resisting. Still obstructing an investigation. "I'm calling backup." Valor rose to his feet with a low growl. Not aggressive, defensive. His positioning shifted, now standing directly in front of Harold, tail stiff, stance firm. Every instinct the dog had was trained for this moment, not to attack, but to assess threat. And right now, Sergeant Buckley was the threat. Daniels stepped between them, holding up both hands. "No, Sarge, don't. Look around. Cameras everywhere. He's not resisting. He's not even moving. Get out of my way, Daniels. I said stand down." Daniels barked back, louder than he intended. "He's a veteran. A decorated one." For a moment, even Buckley seemed shaken. He glanced at the crowd. At the woman live streaming directly in his face. At the TV reporter quietly narrating into her mic, a retired master sergeant and war dog trainer, being accused of resisting arrest by the very system he once served. Harold reached into his coat again, slowly, and pulled out a small worn military ribbon. Purple Heart. The crowd gasped. Even Buckley fell silent. "I bled for this country," Harold said. "And I came home to teach these dogs how to protect it. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd remember what honor looked like." Daniels swallowed hard. "I think one of them just did." All eyes turned to Valor. Still unmoving, still loyal, a living contradiction to the command that had brought him here. He didn't obey hate. He obeyed heart. And in that moment, it wasn't Harold who looked out of place. It was the badge that tried to silence him. By now, the entire block had transformed. What began as a routine stop had morphed into a spectacle, half courtroom, half battlefield. The police officers were no longer in control. The crowd was no longer afraid. And Harold Jennings, the man once ordered to the ground, stood taller than the flashing sirens behind him. He wasn't just a black man with a grocery bag. He was a living archive of forgotten honor. And valor, his silent witness, stood beside him as living proof. A news reporter stepped forward, cautiously. "Sir, can you confirm? Are you the same Master Sergeant featured in the PBS documentary Dogs of War, Unsung Heroes?" Harold gave a soft nod. "Yes. That was me and Valor in 2013. Daniels blinked. "This is the dog from that film? I trained him from a pup. Watched him save lives in Helmand province. And when we both retired, I asked to adopt him. They denied it. Said he was being reassigned." His voice cracked slightly, but not from weakness. From betrayal. "I didn't know where he ended up. I didn't know they gave him to the department." The crowd fell into stunned silence. The same dog that was once denied a reunion with the man who raised him, had found his way back. Not through luck, but through loyalty. Some things, no leash, no uniform, can ever erase. Harold slowly handed the reporter a manila envelope from his coat pocket. Inside were yellowed military documents, adoption request letters, rejection slips. On top, a photo, Harold kneeling beside a younger Valor, one hand resting gently on the pup's head, both framed by the American flag waving behind them. The reporter held it up to the cameras. "This is him. It's real." The live stream chat exploded. Hashtag Master Sergeant Harold. Hashtag Justice for Valor. Hashtag He trained the dog. Harold turned to Daniels. "You want the truth? There it is. You didn't just sick a dog on a civilian. You tried to turn a soldier against his own commander." Daniels looked devastated. And Valor? He simply sat again at Harold's feet, tail sweeping the concrete softly. No bark. No commands. Just presence. Not because he was ordered to obey, but because, finally, he was home. By now, the sun had fully set, but Pine Street burned bright with phone screens, camera lights, and the growing fire of public outrage. Harold stood like a monument to all that had gone unseen and unheard. Beside him, Valor sat faithfully, once a weapon of war, now a symbol of truth. Inside every crowd member's heart, something was rising, not just anger, but conviction. A woman stepped forward from the sidewalk. She wore a nurse's uniform and carried her own kind of quiet power. "Sir," she said to Harold, "my brother served under you. He said you were the only one who ever treated him like a man, not just a uniform." She turned to the camera. "And this is how we repay him." Others followed. "I was at his training seminar back in '05, an ex-Marine shouted. "He used to speak at the community center for at-risk kids," a teacher chimed in. "He fed my family every Sunday after church," an older man said. "He never missed." Voices layered into a rising chant. "Honor Harold. Justice now. Honor Harold. Justice now." Sergeant Buckley, now visibly sweating, reached for his radio. "We need backup to disperse." "No," Daniels interrupted firmly. "We don't need backup. We need to back off." Daniels removed his cap. "Sir," he said to Harold, eyes steady, "on behalf of the department, I'm sorry. For not knowing. For not asking. For what this almost became." Harold didn't speak for a moment. Then, finally, "It's not just about me. It's about how many others never got the chance to say, 'You've got the wrong man.'" The reporter whispered into her mic, "A powerful moment here on Pine Street. A retired war hero, nearly attacked by the very system he once served. The city will not walk away from this unchanged." And as if the moment wasn't powerful enough, Valor stood, walked toward Harold, and placed his head gently in the man's palm. The image was unforgettable. A war hero. His loyal companion. A broken system exposed beneath streetlights and live streams. What was meant to be another routine stop had become a reckoning. But Harold wasn't finished yet. "I won't just walk away," he said. "This time, the world's gonna listen." The next morning, Pine Street looked different. Where sirens once screamed, now stood candle vigils and handmade signs. "We stand with Harold. A veteran should never have to prove his worth." This dog remembered. So should we. But the story didn't end there, it had only begun. By noon, Harold Jennings was trending nationwide. News anchors replayed the footage of Valor refusing to attack, of Harold raising the Purple Heart with trembling fingers, of the crowd chanting his name. Commentators debated policing and race, military sacrifice, and the misuse of K-9 units. The moment had pierced the national conscience. Meanwhile, Harold sat quietly on his front porch, the same porch he'd returned to every evening for the past 20 years. Only this time, Valor lay beside him, not as a tool of the state, but as family. He watched the press conference unfold on his small TV. The mayor stood at the podium, grave-faced. "On behalf of this city, we issue a formal apology to Master Sergeant Harold Jennings. The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave. Further investigation is underway." Then, more surprising news. Effective immediately, all retired military dogs will have their service records traced and reunited with eligible former handlers, if desired. "We call this initiative the Valor Act." Harold leaned back in his chair, stunned. His weathered hand rested on Valor's head. "They finally listened," he whispered. A knock came at the door. Officer Daniels stood outside, out of uniform, holding something in both hands, a framed certificate and a sealed envelope. "It's official," he said. "You've been cleared of all suspicion. The city wants to honor you next month at the Veterans Hall." Harold smiled faintly. They already did. Yesterday, when the truth stood taller than their lies. Daniels nodded, then knelt beside Valor. "You knew the truth before any of us, didn't you, boy?" Valor wagged his tail softly. As the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, Harold stood with quiet pride. Not because his name was cleared, or because the cameras finally pointed in the right direction, but because he didn't let the moment pass in silence. He had stared down injustice. With no weapon, no anger, just memory and loyalty. And in the end, it was the dog they sent to silence him that told the loudest truth of all. Justice didn't bark. It bowed. They sent a dog to silence him, but the dog chose to stand by the man who taught him what loyalty truly means. Harold didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. He let the truth speak, through service, sacrifice, and the bond no badge could break. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from a soldier, and the dog who never forgot him. If this story moved you, share it. Let the world know, heroes still walk among us.